Working Cows Podcast, episode 146.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, powered by the Global Ag Network. Very excited to bring you another episode today. On the front end of this episode, I do want to make you aware of a new resource. A buddy of mine just launched a YouTube channel called Rangeland Revival, and I will have a link in the show notes page to that YouTube channel, as well as I'll embed one of his videos, a very cool portable watering system he's using to water, I think, about 400 pears right now. So go ahead and head on over to workingcows.net/146. Check out the show notes page there for his videos that he's got up there. And then also make sure you also check out some of the other links we'll be talking about with our guest today. And my guest today is Meg Greski. She is a consultant, speaker, writer, and ranch hand, and she's got an experience from the Northeast to the fairly extreme West, measuring into some of the desert Southwest areas of the United States. And we're going to talk to her about her experience in all those different places and kind of some of the advantages and disadvantages of the different places and what she's learned as she's journeyed into a life of agriculture. So, Meg, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Clay. I'm so excited to finally have my own episode, since all of my heroes have pretty much been on this podcast. And I figured if I could ever join their ranks one day, that would be a real achievement.
Very good. Well, you come highly recommended, and Brian Alexander talked about you on a previous episode that we just talked about kind of some of the things he's observing after the strip grazing experiment, and he spoke highly of you and said, I'd like to make a connection and get you guys together. So I guess what I would like to share with people is kind of how you have come to be involved in the ranching industry. What was your background before you came into ranching, and then how have you been involved historically throughout that? And I might stop you a couple times along the way and just ask some clarifying questions as we work through your journey.
Okay, well, it's kind of a long story, but we have, half an hour, 45 minutes or something?
Something like that, yeah.
All right. So I grew up in the Northeast U.S. around the Great Lakes, and I did not have any background in agriculture growing up at all. My parents were people from the city who had moved out to the country for a nice, quiet place to raise kids. And so I grew up in what would be considered a suburban family. We really didn't think too much about where our food came from. And growing up, I figured that I would enter the healthcare field like my sister has. But in high school, it was in 10th grade, I had some friends who were involved in 4-H and FFA. And for English class, my teacher said, you guys have to write a research paper. You could write it on whatever you want. And so I had heard the terms tossed around a little bit, factory farming or industrial ag, and I didn't really kind of know what that meant. Since when I thought of a farm, like a lot of people who aren't in agriculture do, you picture a little diversified family operation where the animals are out on pasture, like a traditional type of small farm. And so I Googled this term, factory farming, and I was deeply disturbed by what I found. I freaked out completely. I did not sleep for a while. I mean, my entire life changed that day, and I didn't even realize the impact of it really till a lot later. But basically what came up was a bunch of activist websites. And I mean, since I've been in this business, I realized that a lot of those PETA and HSUS websites are really overblown and fantastical and stretch the truth, but the concept is the same. So I learned all about the kinds of animal welfare issues that are involved in factory agriculture and about the environmental impacts of high nutrient densities and to some extent about the nutritional like a lack of nutrition in some industrial foods. And so basically from that point on, the entire point of my life has been that I need to find a better way. I have to find an alternative to this. And at that time, this was 2009. I mean, I really had not ever heard of the grass-fed and regenerative movement. It was kind of taken off right around then, but still pretty much an underground thing. So I remember I turned in the paper and my teacher said, great paper, and how you talk about how we need to solve all these problems in industrial ag. And then at the bottom, she wrote, what can we do to fight the CAFOs? And I didn't have an answer to that at that point. But I went into agriculture as a career. I went to college at West Virginia University after I graduated high school, got a degree in livestock science and agribusiness management. And throughout college, all they really taught was conventional management of livestock. And so I started thinking, maybe those activist websites aren't so bad. I mean, maybe all what they said wasn't true. Maybe conventional agriculture is not that bad, But then I was a senior. This is another one of those moments where you don't realize your life is about to change 5 minutes before it happens. So I was a senior, and it was 6 a.m., and I had just gotten done taking care of some of the beef cattle that I needed to check for my calving class, because the cattle we had at the university were conventional cattle that often had trouble calving, and so I had no idea that cattle could calve on their own without help. And so the students took shifts overnight checking these cattle to see if anybody needed help. So I got done with my shift at 6 a.m., and I was tired. My first class was going to start at about 9:30, and I thought, oh man, I can't wait to go back to my dorm and get a little bit of sleep before I got to go to class. But then I remembered there was this grazing conference that was going on downtown that day at one of the hotels. I'm like, I really should go down there and, kind of see what they're talking about. Then I'm thinking, I'm really tired. I don't feel like it. But, I really should go down there because, I could learn something. Well, I ended up going down there, and I was a little bit late for the start of the keynote talk, but I snuck in the back and I sat down, and there was a guy up there talking named Greg Judy. And this is the first time that I had ever heard of Greg Judy. And he was up there saying, you need small cows. You don't need equipment. You don't even need to own your land. You don't need to feed them grain. You don't need to shoot them up with every health product you can get your hands on. You don't need insecticide or your tags. All you need to do is move them. Oh, and by the way, your grass isn't just a place to put them. And I said, wow. It's like the heavens opened up and the angels sang, and I saw the light for the first time. And this was the first I'd ever heard of grass-fed or holistic or regenerative agriculture. And this was the only philosophy that I had heard of up to this point that could possibly have answered the question for me, how the heck am I going to be able to afford to get into this business? Because in feedlots and grain-based cattle production and conventional dairying and all those types of livestock production systems have very high barriers to entry. I mean, you need to have capital or access to someone else's capital and a lot of it. And I could not really figure out where I was going to get that. But I figured that this stuff Greg is talking about, now this is something that I might be able to afford to get into. And so I ran up to Greg after his talk and I said, Greg, I need to be one of those interns that you were talking about. You need to teach me everything you know because that's just about what I feel my only chance is at this point. And so long story short, Greg invited me out to his place in Missouri for an interview and he chose me as one of his interns. So I worked there in 2012 during the big drought of 2012. And I learned all about holistic management from Greg. And it was basically a complete polar opposite of everything that I had learned at school. And I am just so thankful to Greg that he took me on as an intern because everything that I have and everywhere my career has gone since then has been due to the fact that Greg gave me a start.
What year was this grazing conference?
The conference was it would have been March 2012.
Okay.
It was the Appalachian Grazing Conference in Morgantown, West Virginia.
I was just Googling around to see what it was, and I think the earliest one they've got on their YouTube channel is 2013. So we don't get to relive that with you. That it doesn't look like, but there are a few years, 2013, 2015, and 2017. They've had their Appalachian Grazing Conference up there on YouTube. on the YouTube channel. So anyways, I guess I would like to ask a little bit of a follow-up question there. What do you think the role of being involved, not just at Greg Judy's place, but at Greg Judy's place during a drought, how has that continued to impact you and influence the way you think and the way you act in regards to ranching?
So being there during the drought, it really threw it into very sharp relief how different regenerative management is from conventional management. Because when it's raining, everybody's doing great. But when it stops raining, there's a lot of difference between the people who prepared their soil and prepared their forage and had a plan for this type of thing versus the people who are just freaking out and buying $100 bales of hay. So Greg did not feed one single bale of hay during that entire drought in 2012. What we did was that we sold off the grass finishing steers and we kept the cow herd intact, except for some really ugly old culls that needed to go. He also sold some female breeding stock during that time, but he sold them to somebody who was a consulting client of his who wanted to start a herd. So he was able to take advantage of some of those situations. But we did not feed a single bale of hay, and we had plenty of days of grass ahead of us. We just destocked early because the trigger dates were hit on our drought plan. We knew that we were going to be in trouble. Because when they didn't get the rain in June, Greg knew that we were going to have to go into drought mode. And a lot of people didn't realize that it was going to be that dry until a lot later, until they really started having trouble. So we destocked early, and then we tightened the cattle down, and we had 120 days of grass ahead of us for pretty much the entire summer. And our cattle came through it in great body condition with flying colors, and we didn't take the grass down too low. We wanted to make sure that we left enough ground cover and enough residual leaf area so that we wouldn't impact the roots. And then I think it was September, the remnants of a hurricane came through, and we got a number of inches of rain all in one day. We sat in the garage and we just watched it come down, run down the driveway. It was great. And the very next day, that grass came back like gangbusters.
And so
everything turned bright green and it grew right back.
Yeah. So would this have been like 2013 or 2012? You said it was during the drought.
2012.
Yeah. So this was the summer of 2012 is when you went to work for him after seeing him speak in February of 2012. Is that right?
Oh, no, wait. That conference would have been in 2011.
Okay.
Because then in fall of 2012, he interviewed me. And then I graduated in May of 2012, and then I started down there in June.
Okay.
So I was there from June to December of 2012. I really should have stayed for a full year, but at that point, I was a little bit scared and dealing with some personal things, and I just needed to skitter back home and tuck my tail between my legs for a little while.
Sure.
Be under my parents' wing for a little while longer.
Yeah. That's nice to be able to do that. I was just looking it up. It says in 1 Peter 4:8, love covers a multitude of sins. And so I've thought that about rain too. We can make a lot of mistakes when we get rain, but when we don't get rain, we need to have kind of our ducks in a row and all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed.
Oh, yeah. You would have thought, among the conventional people, the ones who were usually laughing at Greg for all the crazy things he did, they thought the world was ending. They were selling all their cows at fire sale prices. Either that or they were feeding them $100 per round bale hay.
Yep.
People were bailing up the interstate medians. People were shipping hay thousands of miles. It was pretty close to being disastrous. Yeah.
And, I watch a lot of Greg Judy's YouTube videos, and he talks about the fact that I think generally he's buying like a $1,200 or $1,300 round bale for $50, which is less than 100, or even less than that. I think he said $50 a ton is usually what he gets for hay in Missouri. Cause there's just so much forage grown in that part of the world. They have trouble even giving it away. Even in a good year around here, it's $70-$80 a ton. And I don't know if the hay's even as high quality as what you would get there in Missouri or not. But anyways, I always kind of am taken aback when he talks about $50 a ton hay. Pretty much anytime he wants it, he can get his hands on it, and that's always
that is definitely a big advantage.
Right. So you went back home after some time at Greg Judy. What was your next stop in the ranching industry?
Well, I figured that I would just stay home for a while. I mean, unfortunately, I met all of the worst people in all the other parts of the country, all at the same time, and all when I was really too young to deal with it. And I didn't stand up for myself very well, and I was really scared and just I felt pushed out like an outsider. I figured, well, I'm just going to go home where I'm comfortable and people know me. And it also happened to be a really good place to set up a grass finishing beef operation. Because the Northeast has a lot of high demand markets in close proximity. And during the summer, the grass does not lignify too much. We have a really nice climate for growing cattle during the summer. So I figured this is definitely not the worst place in the world to set up a grass-based beef operation. So for 6 years, I was up there in New York State in the far western part, and I ran Rhinestone Cattle Company. So I patterned my operation after Greg's operation. So I rented a few hundred acres of land, and I had custom grazed cattle. Started with some cow-calf pairs, and then in the last 2 years I was up there, I changed my plan, and I started going seasonal only versus doing cow-calf all year. Because I figured out that with the amount of snow we get, you can't make any money doing that. I started buying open yearling heifers in the spring, running them with the foal, and then selling them in the fall. And that worked really well. And so I was up there doing that for about 6 years. And then I decided that what I really wanted to do in life was take another whack at living out west. I mean, I figured that I had done about as well as I could do with the climate and the financial conditions up there in New York and just the social and economic situation. The taxes are outrageous. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I figured that I could do better in the business if I moved.
Sure. Did you have any people who shared your way of thinking in your neighborhood in New York?
There are a good number of people that are adopting holistic and regenerative management strategies up there. I mean, they're still pretty few and far between like they are everywhere, but we have a couple of good conferences and pasture walks that everybody would group up at. The Winter Green Up Conference that they have every winter in Albany, New York is a really good one to go to. And I did have a neighbor who lived about 20 minutes away from me. Her name was Jenny Stroh, and she was my best friend, and she raises grass-fed cattle too. So she helped me with a lot of things, and I would be around to help her whenever she needed it. So we did a lot together, and we were a support structure for each other. I think were a couple other, there was like 2 or 3 more grass-fed beef guys that were within the next county or 2 over. But I could always ask them for something if I needed it. I brokered some meat from them. They borrowed bulls from me. I borrowed bulls from them. So I wasn't totally alone there.
Were there any bright spots looking back in the education system as far as agriculture is concerned? Were there any paradigm challengers in there at all, or was it pretty much just conventional?
In the formal education system, like college and extension and all that?
University of West Virginia. At that time?
West Virginia U. Actually, I think that they're one of the first universities to have an organic farm. But it mostly was crop production. They really didn't have much going on up there in terms of animal production while I was there. But I believe that they are still doing that, and they have expanded since. And I took a forage crops class with Dr. Thomas Griggs, and that was probably the most useful class that I took there, because he talked about high-density grazing and about soil microbiology. And I'm rereading my notes from that class now.
When you talk about taking another crack at living out west, would you consider Missouri kind of the start of that, the start of the West? That's, I think, you hear about St. Louis being the gateway to the West. Is that kind of where you would say that break happens?
I would probably draw the east versus west line right around, what is that, the 100th meridian? Yep. Where it really starts, where the land type really starts to change from being a humid climate to an arid climate. So I would say that if you drew a line right like north-south, right around Wichita to Oklahoma City through like Dallas, Fort Worth, and then you could run that north-south. Like I would say that once you get west of Oklahoma City, that's really when it starts becoming like a western type environment. So I started looking for a job in a climate that was very, very different from where I was in the East. Because all of my work up to up to last year had been in relatively humid climates and in the east, where the grasses are different from the west, and the rainfall is a lot different, and just the population density and people's cultural norms when it comes to raising cattle, and just the size of the operations. So I know that I needed to experience the whole other side of the beef industry. Yeah, I had the east I felt pretty much mastered, but there was still a large cultural segment of agriculture that I didn't have any experience in and didn't understand at all. And I wanted to be a lot more well-rounded so that in my consulting work and in my writing and speaking, I can talk confidently to anybody, regardless of what environment they're in, and know where they're coming from and be able to make appropriate recommendations. And so I figured that my career had pretty much come to a stall up where I was at. And if I was ever going to progress, I needed to move.
Okay, so what do you think? I've heard Greg Judy talk about it before, and Wally Olson has kind of repeated that line of thinking. What do you think about the advantages of living in a high rainfall environment as far as helping someone get started? I mean, you spent 6 years marketing grass-fed beef, more or less in that capacity. What do you think about the advantages of a higher rainfall environment, and then I'd like to contrast that with maybe some of the unseen advantages of being out west?
Well, I think that the number one advantage of being in the east in a high rainfall environment is that ecological processes happen way faster. Like if you accidentally overgraze a paddock or two, it'll grow back in 30 to 60 days. If you overgraze something out west here, say in Wyoming or Nevada or even in Oklahoma, you might not see any recovery there until next year. And so the higher rainfall environment is a lot more forgiving when you make a mistake. And you can see results quicker too when it comes to soil organic matter building and plant species composition shifts, just because rain kind of accelerates everything. And litter and biological matter break down faster, and microbes are more active. And like the snow actually helps break down stuff up where I was from in the Northeast. The snow would fall, and it would be heavy, wet snow. It would lay all of the old grass flat on the ground, and it would all disintegrate and become fertility. And every year was a new start. Whereas out in the western arid climate where I'm at now, we might have standing grass that's 2 or 3 or 4 years old if you don't graze it properly, and it just stands there and it turns gray and it goes to waste, and you don't have that type of management challenge.
What about parasite load in those higher rainfall environments or higher moisture environments? Is that enough of a challenge to offset some of the advantages, or like you said, is moving cattle away from paddocks they've already grazed kind of breaks that parasite cycle and makes it a non-issue?
Get cattle from a breeder that didn't baby them. Move your cows every day, and you won't have a parasite problem.
Perfect.
It was never something that I worried about. I did notice some differences in breed and hair color when it came to my cattle. I had some Belts Galilees, I had some Angus crosses, I had some Hereford crosses, a little bit of everything for a while, and it seemed like the black cattle always had more flies than all the other breeds for some reason. Interesting. And I did notice breed differences when it came to resistance to pink eye and things like that.
Sure.
I mean, it may have had more to do with the environment those cattle came from than it had to do with the breed, but I did notice differences in those respects. So I always say, buy cattle from somebody who's doing what you're going to be doing.
Right. Yeah.
It'll save you a lot of trouble.
For
and
sure.
It'll cut a few generations off of your selection time.
Where did this second crack at living out west, where did it land you? How did that come to be? Some of those things.
It was probably the end of 2018. I started just really not being happy with where I was at in life, living up where I was and doing what I was doing. And I started thinking about some old dreams from college about how I'd always wanted to move out west. And so I started kind of looking around for a job. I mean, I didn't want to go too far from home, but I definitely didn't want to be in an area that got 7 foot of snow at the drop of a hat and had some of the highest taxes and cost of living in the nation. So I started looking, and then at the end of 2018, I went to the National Grazing Lands Conference in Nevada. I went with the folks from onpasture.com, and I got to speak there with some of the other writers and with Kathy Bose, who runs it. And that really opened my eyes to how much opportunity there was in a place that I thought no one would ever want me and I would never fit in. So I met a lot of really nice, really accepting, open-minded people who were at that conference and who lived out that way. And I got some connections to help me start looking for a new job. And I fell in love with the land and with the culture. And so I started looking for a job someplace out that way. And I really didn't have my heart set on any certain place. I'm like, Lord's going to lead me where he's going to lead me. And I mean, as long as I don't give up on my life, he won't give up on me either. So I knew I had more work to do, and I had farther to go than where I was in New York. And so I found a job in Oklahoma, in the northwest corner of Oklahoma last year. And I got out here and I really liked that area. But unfortunately, that job didn't work out for me. But I am now in south central Kansas working for Brian Alexander, who I feel is a really good fit as an employer. And so I found a place in the U.S. that I really like living and I really like working. And I've also gotten the opportunity to work with a pretty high-profile consulting company in the regenerative ag world. And so I'm super excited to start working with them. I mean, I'll be in the company of some of the most well-known and well-educated and most innovative people in this business in the world. And I just hope that I can walk in their footsteps someday and offer the same help to farmers that are struggling that they do.
I think we need to not gloss over the fact that you said 7 feet of snow at a time, and lake effect snow is real, and some of those things. That's a pretty incredible environmental challenge, and I think there's probably a broad swath of the Working Cows podcast audience that would not blame you for for moving on
not
from there.
Either. Yeah, I mean, sure. There is a small stretch of New York State that's east of Lake Erie and a small stretch that is east of Lake Ontario that sometimes when the weather conditions are just right, bands of snow set up and just come off those lakes and will just pile snow on you, like feet per hour kind of snow on you.
Yep.
And it's a very small area. So I moved an hour southeast of where my parents lived when I set up shop in New York, and that was where I rented my farm. And that was out of the lake effect area. So even moving just 40 miles can have a big effect. It's getting out of that lake effect snow area.
Yep.
And I learned that, I mean, location has a lot to do with profitability and with the level of success and the level of inputs you need. You cannot profitably do some things in some places.
Right.
I mean, sure, you can do them, but you may not make any money at them. And so I learned the importance of enterprise selection.
Right. Enterprise selection is good. You could do the same thing somewhere else and make more money than you can in a certain other place. So
exactly. I decided if I wanted to be a cow-calf producer and keep cattle year-round, that New York was not going to be the place to do it. Because it was costing me upwards of $300 to get a cow-calf pair through the winter up there, just because of a somewhat short growing season and because of the amount of hay that I needed to buy and what the cost of that hay was. And I was grazing a lot deeper into the dormant season than a lot of people do up there. I mean, I would have cattle on stockpile through the fall and not even have to feed hay until almost Christmas. But then I really didn't have anything useful stockpile-wise to feed them until the grass started growing at the end of April or even May 1st some years.
Right.
It's tough to stockpile up there. I mean, there are people like Troy Bishop who are doing it and are really successful. But because it is so wet, stockpile tends to lose quality really fast. And it tends to get moldy and start disintegrating. So it can be hard to keep quality stockpile through the entire non-growing season. Whereas down here at Alexander Ranch, we go through 365 days on stockpile forage.
I guess more about that east-west advantage, disadvantage contrast. What are some of the advantages that you see in the West? And what are some of the things that you're excited about learning in this new environment?
Well, definitely the number one advantage I see out here, that even though it doesn't rain so much, there's not the mud. And that and that you can stockpile grass and it stays standing and it keeps its quality. And you really can, like, I don't see a whole lot of excuses why people need hay out here. I mean, there should be no reason why somebody managing their grazing very well, who's not in a high snowfall area, should need to feed any hay. And so I definitely think that was the number one problem that I needed to solve in my ranching endeavors, was getting that hay cost out. So I needed to be somewhere where it was not hard to go without hay.
Sure.
And I mean, you have so much freedom and enterprise choice when you don't have a high level of weather mandated supplementary and substitutionary feeding you need to do. And also, like, I started out thinking that I was going to sell meat and serve a really niche type market up there in the Northeast. But then I started realizing that following more conventional market channels was going to be a better fit for me instead of trying to direct market meat to an end consumer. So when I started raising heifers seasonally, it was hard to sell heifers. It is definitely hard to sell anything in the fall in that part of the world because of the winter conditions. Nobody wants to buy anything in the fall. So I needed to go someplace that had more numerous market outlets and better marketing outlets at all times of the year for live animals and for breeding stock, and a place that I could sell breeding stock in volume. And so I think that there may not be, I don't want to say there may not be direct marketing food outlets down here, because I know a lot of people that are neighbors of mine down here that are selling holistically raised meat directly to consumers and animal products, and they're doing very well. But I mean, if you want to play in the conventional arena, the Northeast is really not the place to do it.
I guess long term going forward, what do you see? What's your future involve? I mean, aside from the marketing or the consulting gig, what does your future involve as you see it?
Well, I mean, my future goal still remains today what it was in high school. I mean, I've devoted my life to finding an alternative to conventional ag, something that can provide the yields we need and be economically feasible for operations of all sizes, and to keep farm families on their farms, to keep children coming back instead of going to get jobs in the city, and preserve the rural way of life into the foreseeable future. And the way that we're going to do that is through regenerative management. That's the alternative to industrial ag that I was looking for.
And that's because regenerative management yields more profit?
I mean, I definitely believe that it will almost always yield more profit because of cutting the inputs out. And also because we're not degrading and destroying our natural resources. We're going to keep them intact, and I think our goal should be to leave them better than we found them.
I guess as somebody who interviews a lot of people, I noticed me boiling it down to yielding more profit was your answer to that came with the most pause of any other question I asked. Is there more to it in your mind than that? And I think there's more to it than that too, but is there something else that you would like to say in regards to those, the other intangibles maybe, of regenerative management and why those will, keep farm families on the farm, keep kids coming back to the farm, some of those things?
I'm bad at interviews, so I didn't really have a chance to think about what I was going to say with this whole thing. But
I'm bad at preparing people for interviews, so.
In my consulting, in my writing, in my speaking, I do tend to focus on profitability as my number one goal and the number one topic that I really dive into. Because if you are not a profitable operation, none of the other things are going to happen. I mean, you can't improve the land, you can't provide comfortable lives for animals, and you can't bring your children back to the farms if you go out of business. And we're never going to be able to stand toe to toe with the industrial people who think that we're all crazy if we can't show that this is profitable. So I'm actually working on a new article right now where I'm compiling 100 stories of people who switched to regenerative practices and found amazing success.
Wow.
Not sure where I'm going to publish it yet, but I'm getting that article together because I want there to be irrefutable evidence that we're not crazy and this is not a fluke, and that it's not just anecdotal evidence, and that there are groups out there, one of which is the consulting firm that I'm working with, that are putting together bodies of research proof to show this in the scientific language, because some people want to see that too.
Very cool. Very cool. Really, really appreciate that. I'm
not sure if that just answered your question or not.
Yeah, no, it's great. I really appreciate it. And like I said, you and I are, as most of my interviews go, are flowing from the hip and just we don't have an outline. We're just talking today. And, so I really appreciate you being willing to do that. And you've done a great job. Really, really done a great job. And I do want to, I guess, you've mentioned speaking, you've mentioned writing. Is there an outlet that you have for that? Is there a place where people can see some of those past opportunities that you've had, or is there a place people can go to get in touch with you about bringing you in for future opportunities?
Well, I have a YouTube channel. It's called Regenerative Ranching with Meg, and I have some of my past conference videos up there, so you can listen to some of my talks. And anyone who is looking for a speaker for any programs they're putting together, I would love to be considered and to be involved. So you can look at my YouTube channel and see what it's like to have me talk. And my articles have appeared at onpasture.com, also in the Stockman Grass Farmer and in Acres USA. I'm trying to get my writing into more places, and so you'll see my name popping up a few more places pretty soon, hopefully. Brian Alexander, you can check out Red Hills Rancher, his Facebook page, and also on YouTube, Red Hills Rancher, to follow what we are doing here on the ranch. And then I'm sure that you will put my email and phone number in your show notes page, right, Clay?
If you're comfortable with that, yep, I would do that.
Mm-hmm. So I'd love to answer any questions people have.
Cool. Yeah, well, I will put links to where people can track your stuff down. I see it here on Pasture, and I see your stuff there, Regenerative Ranching with Meg, and just became a subscriber myself. So we'll send some people over there to the channel, and yeah, looks like a real good mix of videos there on different things, and so really good. Really excited to share that with people. And anything else, any major nuggets that we left on the table? Anything else you want to share before I let you go?
Well, I mean, I just hope that the content we presented today has been helpful to people. And I guess my number one goal here in life is to reach the people that are conventional operators right now and are struggling and are just sick of it. I mean, I just want you guys to realize that there's hope and there's a better way, and it doesn't have to be like this. You just have to be willing to listen to some of what us crazy grass people think.
Very good. Very good. Appreciate it. And really thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you too, Clay.
Very good stuff there. Really appreciate that. And next week, very excited for this episode. Something totally different, something we've never done before. We're going to have a discussion, a dialogue between two guys who both paradigm challengers in their own right, but they're both approaching grazing a little bit differently. And as somebody who's starting to experiment with grazing and starting to notice some things on the land and notice some things about the time commitment it takes to graze one way as opposed to another, what we're going to do is we're going to talk to Stuart Austin of Wilmot Cattle Company in New South Wales, Australia, and John Coleman Locke of the J.D. Hudgens, the Locke division of the J.D. Hudgens seed stock producers. They are producing Brahma cattle down there in the coastal region of Texas, and so kind of different environments, but also different styles of grazing. One of them being John Coleman Locke, kind of trending towards that ultra high density grazing, multiple moves sometimes per day, harvesting some maybe lower quality forages, non-selective grazing, at least at some points of the day, and different things like that. So I know John Coleman Locke does graze selectively for animal performance, but he's doing it at a pretty high density. So we're going to talk to him about that, and then why he does it that way. And we're going to contrast that in the same episode and allow those two to interact and ask each other questions about why they graze the way they do. So pretty cool stuff there. Looking forward also in the next few weeks, episode 148, I suppose, somewhere around there, I'm going to be releasing some of those voicemails. So if you have an answer to those questions, go ahead and check out workingcows.net/141, and you can listen to that episode, some of my ruminations, and I asked 3 questions in there. If you want to get in on that, I got 8 or 9 voicemails already that I'm going to be sharing for episode 148, and we're creeping up on that special guest for episode 150. Pretty excited about that. Going to be a fun time to visit with one of the legends in this industry, and ask him to clarify some statements he made on his first appearance on the podcast. So episode 148 is going to be at least part of that episode is going to be the responses to some of those voicemails. So if you want to get in on that, the number to call and leave your voicemail and answer those questions from episode 141 is 605-549-5401. So make sure you take that opportunity, and we'll see you again real soon with one of the more exciting episodes for me personally, with this opportunity of giving these grazers to share why they graze the way they do, and why they, and then ask each other questions about advantages, disadvantages, push back a little bit. So it's going to be an interesting one. Looking forward to episode 147 coming your way real soon on the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.